Hey everybody, Guy here from Chit Chat. Thank you so much for continuing to listen to the podcast, for supporting us by continuing to download our episodes. We are thankful that you continue to show that you think that the story in Central Minnesota is important by continue to listen and recommend guests. I just got done recording a podcast with Chris Schellinger. He was a recommendation from one of our past guests, Desi Murphy. And I was like, of course we should have Chris on. Chris is doing an incredible thing out in the Avon Hills, at the Avon Hills Folk School. We had a fun conversation today about some of the specifics, some of the things that they're doing out there, but really why stuff like that is important. Why is it important for us to remember our past? Why is conservation of land and ideas important? It was a really fun conversation, and I'm excited for you to hear it now. Chris, thank you so much for coming and joining us on the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great to have you here. Will you drink a little cup of coffee here?
You bet.
All right, wonderful. I think we got ourselves a light roast here. I'm not sure if you're...
Probably a good time of day for a light roast.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, Chris, you are with the Avon Hills Folk School. I would love to learn a little bit more about Avon Hills Folk School. I'd love for our listeners to learn a whole lot more about what you guys do. And maybe to start, would you just tell us, what is a folk school?
That's a great question. A lot of people don't know. So folk schools originated in Denmark, 1800s.
Okay.
It's not going to be that long of a story.
That's good.
Based upon the writings of a guy named Grundtvig. Grundtvig was really disillusioned with two things. The state of education, unattainable, unrealistic, and meaningless to the common person. It's all about Greeks and Latin, and nobody cared about that unless you were elite. And he saw the coming of the Industrial Revolution. And he was lamenting the fact that he believed that the community that existed based upon this healthy mutual dependence of the sausage maker, the candle maker, the shoemaker, all these skill sets, these craftspeople, he said within a generation or two, that will all be gone. And the community built up around it will also be gone. And it happened. And the Danes saw this, and they grabbed onto his writings after he was dead, and they said, what must we do? So they decided to create folk schools, schools for the people that were shared and taught meaningful things. There are now, and it came over to this country, early 1900s, and today there's over 70 folk schools in the United States, over 6 for sure in Minnesota. And as I often say, they all could share the same purpose statement, which is we exist to build and enrich community through the sharing and teaching of traditional practices, craft, and art. At the Avon Hills Folk School, which started officially in 2017.
And did you start it?
I started, yeah. I'm the founder, executive director. Yeah. We've chosen to try to really lean heavily into the idea of a folk school for all the people. And so all the people that are here, were here, Dakota, Ojibwe, and still are, by the way, and the people that haven't yet come, they all have and will bring with them their traditional practices, craft, and art. And so we see a great opportunity at the Avon Hills Folk School in the setting that we have to provide that place, supportive environment for them to share their traditional practices, craft, and art. And in doing so, building and enriching not just their communities, but the community at large. And we see that happen all the time.
That's cool. So, what are the kinds of classes and courses? What kind of things could someone come and learn?
Sure, great question. I often feel like I should have a cheat sheet because when people ask me that, I kind of blank out, even though we've done dozens and dozens of different things. So examples of practices, traditional practices, those might be beekeeping, foraging, traditional craft might be timber framing, masonry, art, ceramics, fiber arts, and many of these things overlap. You know, could you just check one box for every one of these? If forced to choose one, but very often you can check 2 or 3 and say, this is both a craft and an art and a practice. So it's very broad, applies to lots of different things, and it's dynamic. So what wasn't traditional 30 years ago, if you say amongst the German people in Stearns County, would it be considered a traditional practice or craft to make sauerkraut? No, everybody's doing it. But today, how many people know how to do it?
Very few.
Very few.
Yeah.
So it's become a traditional practice in craft and art. And it isn't just that. The sharing and teaching of these practices, craft, and art is really a delivery vehicle for that creating of community. One of my board members, Greg Murray, said, yeah, it'd be great to come and learn this thing, but what I'm interested in is the conversation that happens during the class and sitting around the fire after the class. that's what I want to come for. And that is what happens. And it isn't just people that are all like-minded, people from different backgrounds, experiences, communities, ages, showing up. I walked out one morning during a 5-day timber framing class, and here's this 22-year-old from the city that works in a nonprofit serving youth, and this retired physician from Wisconsin. And he's teaching him, I think it was Tai Chi, could have been Falun Gong. It was something like that. And they're out there in the morning, sun's coming up. They didn't know each other 24 hours ago, but there was some really powerful stuff happening.
I want to ask you about a word that you used. You said meaningful things. And so in the 1800s, when the first folk school started, what was the guy's name again?
Grundtvig.
Grundtvig.
NHS Grundtvig. I don't know what the NH or the S stand for.
But we got Grundtvig.
We got Grundtvig.
That's great. What meaningful meant then is different than what meaningful might mean now.
I think if you're talking maybe the specific thing.
Right. Okay. So I think here's the question, right? So in the 1800s, learning timber framing had more meaning in that, or the likelihood that you would use that in your everyday was probably higher, right? Like, because the likelihood that you might build your own house or be a part of building your house was greater then than it is now.
Because it was still part of the common practice.
So it was meaningful in a different kind of way, right? Because like maybe that skill set actually would be useful in a really like tangible, tactile kind of way.
I'm going to challenge that a bit.
Awesome. Let me finish the question, then you do it.
Yeah.
And today, the likelihood is not great that someone will need timber framing knowledge to build their own house, but it's still meaningful in a different kind of way. So will you just like talk a little bit about like this word meaningful and how things maybe, and again, I can't wait for you to challenge, but how something could be meaningful in a different kind of way in the 1800s than it is today, and it still also be meaningful?
I don't know if there is a answer to that question. When you added the word need, that helped.
Okay.
Because it's, and then that's very subjective too. What do you mean by need? So yes, you would have been a much better chance of needing that knowledge in the 1800s to help build a timber frame,
survive,
join a guild, survive, and be involved in that. You don't need to know that today. We could come back to the term need in a moment relative to folk schools. But what makes it just as meaningful today as it was then is, first of all, a recognition that as a species, how we have existed in the last several hundred years, let's say, prior to the technological revolution, was a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of our time as a species. And yet it was very, very different than how we lived for millennia. Lived in community, in nature, creating things by ourselves, for ourselves, with each other. It was out of necessity, but over, many millennia, it became who we were, what we were. That has all changed relatively in a blink of an eye.
Yeah.
Now, the technological revolution, I would argue, presents the same situation, but even greater than what Grundtvig saw with the Industrial Revolution. Within a generation, we have gone from, I don't have to maybe elaborate what has happened with technology from the standpoint of personal computers to earphones and everything, AI, all of that.
And then what that means for what I consider my space.
Well, your space, but this is very difficult for me to verbalize, but one piece is that we have in our hands and fingers some of the most complicated and advanced instruments ever devised.
Yep.
And we have been reduced to using them to punch buttons as a species. Not unilaterally, certain countries and people, but there's consequences to that. There's consequences to not creating. There's consequences to not creating together. There's consequences to not spending time in nature. We don't fully understand what those consequences are, but we're barraged every day with research and studies and warnings of the consequences of that. The Surgeon General of the United States has said this is an epidemic of loneliness.
Yeah.
So the act of sharing and learning these traditional practices, craft and art, are meaningful in ways that have nothing to do with whether or not you'll ever use them.
Yeah.
That we could expand on probably for a week-long symposium.
Yeah.
And maybe it has. It should probably.
It probably has, and it should happen again and more.
Yeah. So I kind of wandered around there a bit.
That's great. I mean, I think we're saying the same. I think we're saying the same thing. Like, I understand the need for that thing, and I think the reason we need it, or the reason that it has meaning, feels like it's maybe shifted a little bit. And just because we don't need it in its practicality in the same kind of way, I don't think it doesn't feel like that it's less valuable. In fact, it might be more valuable and more important that we do some of this literal and figurative unplugging so that we can go and learn things that we've never known.
It's just the act of creating. It helps to re-engage, build, enhance, reveal, uncover our creative side, our creative confidence, which is going to serve us well when we go back to the modern world, to the real world.
Yeah.
Those are skill sets that will benefit us in many ways. That we aren't exercising that muscle in the same way that we used to. I just heard a thing this morning where this teacher was surveying her students, and presumably they were being honest about it, and how are they using AI. And some of the answers were kind of innocuous and simple, but some of them said, I use AI to brainstorm for me. She says, I found that deeply concerning. What is that doing to their creativity, to their ability to manifest creative and original thoughts? I don't think it's helping. I don't know. Maybe it could. But.
Yeah, man, there's so many different kind of ways you could go with it. I'm torn. I'm torn with the conversation around AI. There, in one regard, it feels like if I'm going to say, I'll never touch AI, which I kind of am an old soul, like, and a little bit of a contrarian at times. And there are times when I think to myself, like, I never want to touch that. I never want to participate in that thing. And I wonder with AI, if it is this little thing, my apprehension around AI is similar to maybe people in the 90s being like, email? I'll never do that.
Sure.
And don't you know how much better it is to like send someone a card in the mail, which I still love. I love handwriting and sending. But I could imagine that if I was a working professional in the 90s rather than a 5-year-old, that I would have thought disparagingly about email. And now here it is, so ubiquitous, and we have, with our human intellect and our energy, we have made it a useful tool that we can do other things, and hopefully we still maintain handwriting and the personal touch of a written thing and all that stuff, right? And so I wonder what aspect of AI is inevitable in a kind of way that we should push in, right? Like as makers and creatives, and
right.
we should make sure that we're touching it. We should make sure that we're involved in it so that we can make sure that we're the master of it. And then we should use it as a tool inside of creativity. And again, I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah.
But again, part of me wants to be like, I'll like just run from it. And then the other part is like, is that actually the worst thing? And I thankfully there are so many brighter people that are thinking about AI, but that's the kind of thing that I think about with it. Should I resist at all costs because it's a moral good to do that? Or should I figure out how to like exert my will and my energy and my creativity on it so that it becomes a subservient tool to me, the master of that tool?
Right. I think there's a lot of ways that it can be positive and supportive of our blind spots.
Yeah.
Something we're weak to. Can it help in that way? But it's not an either or proposition. I think is what I'm saying is that I'll just let AI do everything, or fill in the gap, do everything, so that I'm just as a baby robin in the nest with its mouth open, its head tilted back.
Yeah.
Just eating whatever gets put in it. There's consequences to that too. If you're just not exercising that muscle.
Yeah. Why do you think it's important to do new things that you have never done before?
Because it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to do that. And it requires all of us to get outside our comfort zone. There's a book I haven't read yet called The Comfort Crisis that sounds amazing. That's the only way, not the only way, I think it's one of the most productive and surprising ways that we can grow as individuals and by extension as a community, because we don't know what we're going to discover. One of the things that we have on our website, I think we still have it on there, says, when was the last time you did something for the first time? I don't know that I can answer that the way I'd like to.
Sure.
And I run a damn folk school
Yeah.
that has that tagline on its homepage. So that's my short answer.
Yeah. I think, from the conversations you and I have had in the past about what you guys are doing out there, from what I've heard other people as they talk about what their experience has been like being out there with you. Full disclosure, I haven't been yet. I haven't actually gone and taken a course, but I want to, and I will at some point. I'm excited about that. But I think the thing that feels like maybe one of the most valuable things about what you do is that thing of just like getting out of your comfort zone and doing a thing that you're uncomfortable doing. At least that's I think one of the things that maybe I'm the most excited about is that little bit of stretching that comes when you're kind of thrust into an environment where you have to figure out how to do something that doesn't come natural to you. And even like the idea of a beekeeping course sounds so much fun to me. I live in Sartell, and I can't like Sartell city code. I can't have bees, right? But it would still like so. The usefulness of a beekeeping course for me, like, because I can't have them, and I still think that might be the one that I come and do because I want to learn about it.
Right. Funny you should mention that one in particular because
you're working with the government to get them to change.
No, not at all. So our purpose is to build an enriched community, and the community is built in many ways, but one is one class at a time. Right. These people come together. Many times don't know each other, so we're building that community, and so. Every time we have a class, we just can run with all kinds of ideas, and then we could do this, and then we could do this, and then we could do this, and kind of build upon it. And with the beekeeping in particular, one of the things that we haven't got a lot of traction on it yet, but I hope that we will. To your point, people often say, I think I'd be really interested in that. I think I'd really like that. But I can't do it because I live in fill in the blank city. And we say, well, we can help with that. Because we have a community apiary, much like a community garden. You don't have to keep your bees there. You can keep them here. Or you can keep them at Milk and Honey. And not only will you have a place to keep them, but you have the supportive environment of the beekeepers and other people that are keeping bees there to do that. And you might find out after a year or two that you that was cool, that was fun. I would trade that for anything. Yeah. Now I know why honey costs so much money, and I have a real value of it, and I'm not gonna do it anymore. But you did it,
yeah,
and it got you out of the city. It got you to check on your bees. There was something that, on some level, depended upon you. So, and that's just one thread of an example of how can we go beyond having this class.
This was a number of years ago, but I was at church, and a friend at church said, "I just said, what are you doing today?" And they're like, we have to go, and our chickens are all at age, and we've just been putting it off, and we need to go in, we need to harvest them. And it just it was almost like I was watching myself say it. I just said, could I help you? Like I have never butchered a chicken. I've never cleaned a chicken before, but I eat chicken. And it was just this thing, like it just kind of came out of my mouth. Like, do you need help? Could I help you? And it just felt like, in this moment, it was like, I eat chicken. I should maybe know. Like, what is this thing? What's it like to participate in the termination of a chicken and then the processing of it so that it can actually be consumed for fuel and for energy? And so it was an incredible thing. It's the only time I've done it, but now when I eat chicken, I have an idea of kind of what it took to do that thing. And I'm really thankful that I did it. It was stretching. I had to learn so many things. But also, this was one of the things that was really fun is like my friends who were there, their kids were there, and their parents were there. Even this activity, there was this fun little community. Everybody had their job. Kids are kind of running and collecting chickens, and dad's working on the machine that pulls the feathers. And, just everybody kind of had this job, and I just kind of had to fold myself in to this little community that showed up for that day to do this big task.
Right.
And I'm really thankful that I did that. And it's that kind of thing that it feels like kind of what you're talking about. And
exactly
getting plugged into a community, learning a task that you've never done before. Also, if you eat honey, if you enjoy honey, having a knowledge of like what it actually takes to like participate in the keeping and collection of that's a valuable thing. If for no other reason, I think, and again, I don't know anything about that, but it feels like even if the only thing is it makes you a grateful consumer or participator in that thing.
Yes. It gives you context and allows you to be grateful and appreciate things. Yeah. And too often we've become a society of spoiled, entitled people who really probably aren't as grateful as they should be or as appreciative.
I think
because they
clear.
don't have. Why would they be?
Yeah.
they haven't been given the opportunity. I mean, there's plenty of reasons why they still could be, but I'm getting off on a bit of a tangent there.
Yeah.
But, that's wonderful. And that doesn't mean you went out and bought 30 chickens next year
No.
and started raising chickens.
I don't have a place to raise them.
But you had that experience. Yeah. And there's so many, we're a young organization and that we have most of our stories in front of us and we have so many ideas we can't even hardly stand still most of the time. But a lot of them are geared towards providing those kinds of experiences that most likely people will never repeat, but they might. And as we've elaborated on, even if they don't, there's a tremendous amount of value there of knowledge and appreciation for the others that do that.
Yeah.
But there are not infrequently cases where people do make 90-degree turns in their life. Our timber framing instructor, one of them, used to be a computer programmer.
Okay.
He took a timber framing class 30 years ago, quit his job, and started a timber framing company. Now, he's since retired from that, but he teaches. And there are not an infrequent number of cases of that happening. And those types of things, whether you quit your job and change something that dramatic, or if coming to a folk school and having that kind of an experience is simply a break, it reminds me of a line in Thoreau where he talks about captains of industry leading lives of quiet desperation. You talked earlier about growing one of the businesses so large, and that could have pulled you into a path where you were strapped to the yoke and you really couldn't get out, and that could lead to a life of quiet desperation where you're like, I hate this.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't hate it, but you went into a career in your early 20s or late 20s, and you got the job, you got the relationship, you got the car, you got the mortgage, you got the kids and the health insurance. And that ceased to be what you really, really wanted to do quite a while ago. And so these are important opportunities to scratch that itch and live that other life and maybe discover that that is really what I want to do.
Yeah.
Or something different than what I'm doing. And a whole host of other feelings and experiences that people have.
Yeah. So, I mean, folk schools are old. They've been around since the 1800s. And older than this idea of folk schools are like the things that you guys teach at folk schools. So it has a a history and a rootedness in old and classic and kind of timeless things. So in relationship to that, what's next? How do you use the past, all this stuff that you guys do and care about, as you think about the future, maybe for your organization, and even just like kind of in general, as you head into modernity more and more and more, how do you move forward with a folk school?
Can you narrow your question for me?
Yeah, that's great.
How do we move forward in the context of ever-changing technology, bringing that into the fold, and involving that, staying relevant?
Yeah, great clarification. I think I kind of asked two. So I think maybe just to start, what are you guys hoping to do with the folk school? Like what are you hoping to still do, and where are you hoping that the organization goes?
Okay. So we operate on 64 acres in the, as I say, the west slope of the Avon Hills. We have woods and woodland and forest, which I've learned are two different things. Forests are thicker than woodland. Prairie, wetland, and the just stunningly beautiful Spunk Creek, which is unlike most other running water in Stearns County in central Minnesota, because most of that is slow moving and ropey, and this is a fast moving stream that's coming out of the hills. And it's our ultimate goal, as we can afford to do it, and it makes sense, is that we will gift this land to the folks with the land and the building. Folks who will own this property will be their forever home long into the future. So that's a very important part of that vision. The folk school was actually preceded, the idea of the Avon Hills Folk School was preceded by a goal of preserving that land. And we were able to check that box on May 31st of this year. This is my repping the Minnesota Land Trust with my hat today. We signed a conservation easement with the Minnesota Land Trust that is tied to 58 of the 64 acres. So pretty much everything other than where the buildings are is permanently protected with this legal document that runs with the land, that cannot come off of it. The land cannot be divided, it can't be developed, it can't be clear cut, you can't put a gravel pit on there, you can't plant corn, So barring a natural disaster, when your kids' kids come out there, it will look just like it does today. So that's an important piece. So that gives a picture of what our vision is for that property as a whole, and that it is robust and active and continuing to, in the most meaningful way possible, which we could explore that at length, be a space and a place where people can come and share their traditional practices, craft, and art to build community and really be bridges between the different communities. So that's and there's other things, but that's, I think, a bit of that vision. And I would add to that, just because it's important for certain audiences, is that this isn't all, as some people would say, all artsy fartsy. We will be an economic engine out there. We have, but when the calendar turns to 2025 this year, we will have welcomed over 1,700 people to the folk school. Last year was 630. These people come, they pay money to take classes, they stay somewhere, they buy food, they buy gas, all of that stuff, right? We pay instructors, we work to make it a meaningful way. So we will become an economic engine, and I think nonprofits should get a little more recognition for that. And I think we can do more work to shine the light on that and really show what that looks like. So that will be another reality for what we, I think, can accomplish. And then the last thing I'll say about that space and places, I've often lately been thinking about it less as the folk school and as this space and this place at which the folk school activities happen, along with maybe other things. And I probably should have started with this, is that the Avon Hills are really a special place. They've been a place of intersection for thousands and thousands of years. My friend Phil Steger, founder of Brother Justice Whiskey, which even if you don't like whiskey, you should go visit Brother Justice. He's a tremendous storyteller. He talks about the fact that for thousands of years, this is where the boreal forest from the northeast came and met the deciduous big woods of the southeast and met the prairie from the west, all landing here. Things are different here. The Avon Hills are this pile of dirt that was pushed down from Canada by two different glaciers. So the soil is different. The minerals are different. The plants are different. It seems like the perfect place to have a folk school. The Dakota and Ojibwe reached a point of stasis right here, the Avon Hills. Not here, but there. Dakota used to be way into Wisconsin. The Ojibwe pushed them out back to Minnesota 300-ish years ago, and this is where they reached the point of stasis. They called it the middle ground. I'm just beginning my journey of understanding and appreciating their history and their place here, and when we very much want them to be, again, part of the story of this place. So they must have recognized it as a special place. I'm not going to go so far as say sacred. I don't know that. But they would have known about the hills and the hunting and the maple trees and the stream, the creek that ran shallow and fast. And every spring, walleye and northern and suckers and carp come up it. And after a long, hard winter, that would have been where you wanted to be. So we want to really lean into that and think about how can we honor that place and share it and make sure that all these great things can happen and more, grow organically. In ways that I can't imagine right now and are okay, because it isn't about any one or group of people. It's about whoever community is at a point in time.
You said you have 64 acres. Do you need more? Or is, as a guy who owns a lot in Sartell, it's hard, 60, I know 64 is a lot, but can you do the kinds of things? Can you grow in the kind of ways that you want to grow and you see yourself growing on 64? Or is part of the plan to try to keep growing the footprint of the school as well?
It's a great question for a number of reasons. One, and we're having this conversation now, is to have 600 people come over the course of a year, that's manageable. But now if there's 2 or 3 or 4 times that many people, what's our impact on the land? We don't want to look like the worst campsite that you've ever been to, right?
Just wore out.
I mean, you might as well be in a parking lot. So we have to be cognizant of that. We have no plans to grow the footprint. But when I was asked by the Minnesota Land Trust when we signed that conservation easement, they said, well, what are some of your ideas about this or thoughts? And I am hopeful that that can be an impetus, if you will, or encouragement of others to do the same thing adjacent to this land.
Sure.
So that 58 protected acres becomes 78, becomes 178, becomes what have you. And maybe, and I have seen this already without naming names, that there are people adjacent or nearly adjacent to us that like what we're doing. And I have had conversations with some and not with others that might your property become part of our story. And some have said, I like the idea of that.
Yeah.
So maybe,
Yeah.
again, that it happens organically for the right reasons because we collectively are doing good things. Yeah.
When you engage with Minnesota Land Trust, are you interviewing them? Are they interviewing you? Like, what's that process like to figure out if your property is the right thing for them, and is this the right place for you to take this asset and give it or assign it?
Well, of course, I can only speak from my personal experience.
Yeah.
They do a land trust, conservation easements all over the state. They have several hundred that they hold, at least. Sometimes they're very small. It has to do with a combination of scale and significance. So you might have what's called a fen. I'm going to give a terrible description of this. Basically, my understanding of a fen is a wetland in the middle of the woods because there's a spring there.
Okay.
I'm sure there's people that will hear that and cringe, but it's not it's imperfect at best.
But it's close.
That might be a conservation easement on 2 acres. And then it might be something that's much larger, and we're 58 or 58 acres. I actually reached out to them probably 10 years ago, maybe more, maybe 12 or 15 years ago, with the idea of a conservation easement. They came out, the staff at the time, we toured it, they liked it, and then I talked about the vision for the folk school, which preceded our founding by 5 to 10 years. And the response then was, yeah, we kind of like uncomplicated, so I just don't think that's going to work. I said, that's fine. If it's not going to work, it's not going to work. Left it lie, and then they called me in February of 2023 and said, we have the ability to do one more conservation easement. Are you interested? And I said, well, yes, but what's different?
Yeah.
Right, because we talked. And their answer was, well, we think differently now than maybe we did before. And I'd like to go back now that it's all done and say, what do you mean by that? And my interpretation of what they meant by that was, which might be completely false, was that they recognize that preservation is great, but to connect that with an opportunity for people to also experience the land in different ways. Meeting people where they're at is important. And I would say one thing about that that's a bit specific to what we do. We have youth programming, as I mentioned, and we have a setting which is unusual amongst folk schools, which is we have all this land. Most folk schools, not all, but many are in some type of a setting, municipal setting.
Yep.
Grand Marais, Marine on St. Croix, Ely, Duluth, to name some of the Minnesota ones. We have all this land and this nature, and we choose to believe that a traditional practice is simply being in nature and being comfortable with it and letting all the benefits that accrue from it to experience and enjoy that. And so we have a lot of youth that come out to the folk school, whether they are kids from Holdingford or kids from Metro St. Cloud. And many times, generationally, they don't have that experience. That can exist for a child from Holdingford or St. Cloud. It can happen for a white child or a black child or a Somali immigrant or what have you. But often we have groups of kids come out and say there's 20 or 30 kids. At best, the reaction can be, I'm not real sure about this, to, I'm afraid to go in the woods.
Yeah.
Which is really, it's really horrible that we have, in the largest sense, created a situation where they, and maybe generationally, they do not have that comfort with being in nature. And therefore, that affordance and that benefit has been taken away from them. And so we get the kids out there, and they require far less of a bridge than most adults to get back to what I'll call their original self, or I'm not sure. They get into nature, and even the kids that were afraid, they know what to do.
They jump in quicker.
Exactly. Within an hour, they are fully engaged and immersed in nature, literally immersed in the creek sometimes, underwater. And these are kids that were just, nature to them had mostly been a mowed park with playground equipment.
Yeah.
And there is so much more for them to discover. There's a wonderful book, and it was wonderful for me being a 50-something white guy from central Minnesota. Black Faces, White Places by Dr. Carolyn Finney, I think is her name. Finney is correct. And talks about, and I'm super summarizing this, some of the reasons, many of the reasons in the history, why when you travel to the Black Hills or Glacier or Yosemite, the number of people of color that you see in the course of a week, you can count on two hands. Now, I haven't been any of those places in a few years, but I feel that that's one of the things, the opportunities that we have is to help contribute in a way to reverse that, offer those opportunities and experiences. I don't remember what got me on that very specific thread.
I think one of the things that feels so right about having your property in a land trust, I mean, how neat that if most of these, folk schools don't have something like that you guys do, but it feels like the impetus is the same. Like the impetus of conservation is the same. With the folk school, you're trying to take something that would be forgotten otherwise, without energy, without intentionality to preserve that thing. Modernity would just eat that up and make it go away. And that happens with land all the time. And so it feels like a great partnership, a folk school on a piece of land with the purpose of conservation. Because it feels like you're striving for really similar things, just in these kind of different spheres.
Yeah, I think you're right. I hadn't really thought about it in that direct of a sense, but yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. Well, it's really cool. I'm excited. I'd love to come out and take a class, and I'm going to figure out which one that I'll take, and I'll bring my kids. I love figuring out ways to get my kids in nature too. But yeah.
That'd be great. And I also want to invite you and the whole Switchboard team to come out as a group.
Okay.
We're working on something that is in its infancy. To frame it, I often talk about team building, which it absolutely is not.
Okay.
Because I think generally team building has barely scratched the surface on what it proposes to deliver.
Sure.
But we are, at this point, we call it being together differently in this place. It's an opportunity for a group of people who, ostensibly, in this example, work together, to come out and through the course of a day, learn a little bit more about themselves, or maybe relearn some things about themselves, and as well about the people they work with, and then to be able to take that new awareness and possibly unconsciously, very organically, do something very powerful because of that. And we're looking for some guinea pigs.
Count Switchboard in. We love our team, and we love opportunities to spend time with our team, even outside of the walls of our office. I think you're right though about team building kind of as a trope. Sometimes it feels like people approach team building like they're trying to manufacture this thing for the first time that doesn't actually exist anywhere else. And so if I go here, we can finally get a unified team, or a team that enjoys each other or is cohesive in some kind of way. And really, I think the conversation for managers and owners should start way before that.
Exactly.
What are you doing to actually build your team and have a healthy and cohesive environment every day at work? And then team building opportunities, they become a really incredible bonus, and probably you get a whole lot more out of them. So, we're excited for it, and it's the kind of thing that we try to do. Not team building activities, but we're trying to build a team in a unique kind of way here. And so we would love to come out and maybe get pushed and challenged a little bit.
Well, and selfishly, we know that we would, I think I know enough about you and your group that I know we would learn probably at least as much as you may out of the experience. So we would look forward to that.
We'll bring a camera too and leave behind some really pretty pictures for you too.
That would be cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, sweet, Chris. When we're done, we'll talk about it. But I'm excited for that.
That'd be great.
all of these conversations have been fun and unique and different because all the people that we've talked to are unique. This is really different and unique. I think what you're doing is special, and I'm thankful for Central Minnesota. On behalf of Central Minnesota, I'm thankful that you are doing that, and it sounds really special. And so fun to talk to you and hear a little bit more about it. I've known you a little bit over the years in different kinds of ways, and I've just heard little pieces, but hearing a whole lot more about it today was an absolute treat. So,
Well, I'm grateful for the
thankful you came.
invitation. Thank you.
One of the things that we do, just to close out our podcast every time, do you have an unpaid ad? Someone, something, some idea that you think deserves a little plug?
I do. Initially, this has stressed me out quite a bit when you asked about this, but it quickly became clear what my ad needed to be. So the Anchor Bar in Superior, Wisconsin gets all the press for their burgers.
Okay.
And I'm going to say it doesn't deserve it.
Okay.
The atmosphere is amazing. You should absolutely go to the Anchor Bar for the atmosphere, have a beer, and then get back in your car, drive back over the bridge,
Okay.
and go to the Breeze Inn on Jean Duluth Drive,
Yep.
just west of Duluth, not north. I know everybody thinks it's north, but it's more west. Excuse me, east. Oh my God, east. And the Breeze Inn, it's maybe just a couple miles outside of Duluth. It's right near where the sled dog race used to start. They have the best burgers
Okay.
in Minnesota.
All right.
The Breeze Inn. And if you like beer, they have some excellent beer there too.
Okay.
You won't
Wonderful.
regret it.
All right. My unpaid ad for the day. I thought about it because as I opened this to like take my little notes or whatever for our thing today, I am using the bottom half of my last sheet because I ran out. And my little ad, my little pitch is that you should get a notebook and you should write notes and you should tape the little things that your kids give you to it in there. Just, it's a fun thing to just like remember your year, remember your time. And I think that we can communicate better when we're writing and stuff. And so grab a notebook, write in it, and remember your year.
I concur.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Chris, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot,
Appreciate
Guy.
having you on.